Does your company have a good wellness program? See how it stacks up against the healthiest employers of Indiana and across the country. Visit us online at healthiestemployers.com to join the community and start your application today.
He's hoping that wind can push him through. J.R. Hildebrand trying to conserve fuel, trying to do the unthinkable, win his first Indianapolis 500. He's already in 3.
From his perch in turn 2, calling that dramatic finish to the 2011 Indianapolis 500, to the studio, debating TV comedy with his broadcast partner.
Saved by the Bell is only popular because it is so horrifically cheesy that people enjoy it because it gives them an uncomfortable feeling in watching it because they're embarrassed for everyone involved.
That is not my personal experience with Saved by the Bell at all.
That back and forth over the airwaves is what Jake Query has dreamed about since he was 12 years old. It was back then that he would call into the WRTV Channel 6 newsroom in Indianapolis and bug sports anchor Ed Sorensen. Query eventually convinced Sorensen to let him tag along at Channel 6, which he did for 6 years, ultimately leading to a full-time job and a successful career in TV, radio, and eventually to his current job on the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Radio Network. Learn more about what drives Hoosier broadcaster Jake Query on this edition of the Business and Beyond podcast. Hello and welcome to this edition of the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. I'm Gary Dick. Jake Query lived in Shelbyville until his family moved to Washington Township in Indianapolis, where he attended Allisonville Elementary School and experienced one of his proudest moments as a youngster, 1984 Spelling Bee runner-up. Jake went on to graduate from North Central High School, briefly attended the University of Kansas before winding up back at home at Indiana University. 2020 was a tough year for Jake. His nearly 9-year run on afternoon sports radio came to an abrupt end. He came face to face with a gunman outside a gas station, and he suffered a massive heart attack in October. But he is healthy and back on the airwaves, and I'm pleased to have Jake Query as my guest this week on the Business and Beyond podcast. Jake, it is great to connect with you. How are you?
Gary, not only am I well, and not only am I appreciative and flattered that you have me on in the arena of people that you talk to, of which I, in no way, shape, or form, share any level of success. But I also, in hearing you recount my 2020, my first thought is, my God, you better not leave the house because I'm clearly a jinx button. So I don't know how long you want to talk to me here, but I'm well. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, and you are looking good as well. And this is a busy month for you. May's a great month, of course, to be in Indianapolis, and for you as part of the IMS Radio Network. And we're actually taping this conversation now race week, the week before the Indianapolis 500. What is race week? You know, the days leading up to the Indy 500. What's it like for you as you prepare to be part of the radio network?
I think the Indy 500, the thing that makes it so special to so many people is it's such a nostalgic event. And I think to a great extent, it takes you back to, harkens you back to the first things and the first people that you enjoyed it with, whether it be your grandparents, your parents, your friends from college, and all those things come into play for me. It does get busy, admittedly. I always kind of joke, it's like the 10 days of the year where I actually have some relevance in a small way to something where people want to talk to me, which is kind of cool. But you know, it's a chaos, but it's an organized and an expected chaos, and it's an appreciated chaos. It is, to me, the greatest honor and the greatest, really, feeling of satisfaction that I could possibly have to, even at the most peripheral level, be involved with what I believe to be the greatest event in the world. And so, you know, I'm very flattered by all of it. I'm appreciative of it. I get excited by it. I mean, every day, you know, a couple of times a day, things like an interview or going to MC one of the team's events, or things of talking to school-age kids about the race. Those are typically, in a non-COVID year, the things that get involved. Let's say probably 2 to 3 a day for the week leading up to the race. Then the race itself is funny because when I put the headsets on, I always think to myself, well, the hard part's over with. This is the fun part. This is the easy part now, because all the other, just trying to figure out where I'm supposed to be is half the challenge.
Yeah.
So I love every minute of it.
You touched on it a moment ago, but just personally, how does it feel to be part of that network? It is such an iconic group of names over the years, current and past, who have been part of that network. Just to be, and you, I think, joined in 2007. You've been a key part for a number of years. How does it make you feel from a kind of a personal standpoint?
Incredulous, admittedly. I don't know even if I'm worthy of it. I kind of by happenstance fell into the position that I was in. And I just thought, well, I guess I'll do this until they figure out that I shouldn't be here. And I'm still here, but it's a great honor. I think the thing about the IMS Radio Network to me that I most enjoy is the people that I work with. And it's really just, the 500 is about a group of guys or gals or family members, friends, enjoying a day together. And that's what we are. We are a group of workers who are all really good friends, who joke and rib with each other all year long in the off season. And that's the time of year. The Indy 500 is the day where we all get together and we just spend the day with our friends. And that's what I love about it. So I'm very flattered. I'm very humbled. And that's never gone away. But the honor of it has never gone away to me.
Yeah. Well, as mentioned in the intro, Jake, this past year and a half has been quite a ride for you. People obviously know you from the IMS Radio Network, but they also very much know you from the Query and Schultz sports talk show, which aired for, I think it was 8 years, something like 2,100 plus shows. You and Derek were staples of afternoon radio and WNDE here in Indianapolis. That ended all of a sudden in January of 2020 when you were part of a cost-cutting move at iHeartMedia. Talk about that, because there were some crazy things going on in your life back then. In fact, you had a gun. You were staring down the barrel of a gun as you witnessed a robbery just a couple of days before you got the word that you were losing your job.
Yeah, it's really funny, Gary, because I remember in early January, so I'm a huge Clemson football fan.
Right.
And
hey, before you go on, how did you become a Clemson fan? I've always wondered that.
It's a great question. When I was a kid, we would vacation in Hilton Head, South Carolina. And the big thrill of vacation was we would go to the Piggly Wiggly, and my mom would let us pick a junk food for the week that we normally couldn't have, because we're on vacation. So when I was 8, I bought a 6-pack of Clemson orange soda. And so I always kind of liked them. And then when I was in high school, it was Ed Sorensen at Channel 6 who was kind of mentoring me and be a sportscaster. I was a huge IU sports fan. And he said, hey, man, if you're going to be a sportscaster and you end up in Indianapolis, you can't be a fan. You've got to be objective. So you need to pick a team that you'll likely never cover and let that be your sports energy outlet. And I said, I've always kind of liked Clemson, and I had this can. So that was my team. So I've been a Clemson fan ever since. And then they got really good.
Yeah.
So at any rate, they were in the national championship game. They played on a Monday night in the national championship game, and they got blown out of the building by LSU and Joe Burrow. And that night, I couldn't sleep. The game was like replaying in my head. It was really weird. And I couldn't sleep. It was about 4 a.m. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to go to CVS and get some sleep meds. So I went to a 24-hour CVS, and I'm waiting in line. And I thought, okay, so in the last 72 hours, I went into a gas station where there was an armed robbery going on, and the watchman pulled a gun on me. And then I watched Clemson get blown out of the building. And now I can't sleep. And it's 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'm at a drugstore. And I remember thinking, I don't know that I could have a worse 72-hour stretch than this.
Yeah.
And I got 5.5 hours sleep, and I woke up and there was a text message that said, you need to go see the general manager as soon as possible. You work in radio and TV, you know exactly what that means.
Yeah.
I called him, and he answered. And I remember the first thing I said, well, is it just me, or is it me and Derek? And he paused and said, no, Jake, it's about 2,000 people. And I remember he said, I really need you to get in the next 30 minutes. And I said, well, are you going to fire me if I'm late? And he kind of laughed and said, why don't you get in when you can? And I went in, and that's when I found out that we were laid off. And I didn't take it personally. It's business. I understand it. We did the best we could. We did something we can be proud of. And we got a lot of fun and a lot of years and a lot of friendships out of it. So yeah, I wouldn't say all's well that ends well, because I don't know that it ended well, but all's well.
Did you say it didn't surprise you? At the same time, you and Derek built something. I mean, you were a mainstay in the marketplace. Did that really kind of sting a little bit more? Say, hey, man, we've got this thing rolling. We've built this thing over time and are excited about it. And then obviously, all of a sudden, you get this news.
I think that's a pretty astute observation, Gary. I would tell you this: when you work for a national conglomerate media company, and probably a national company regardless, but you are aware of the fact that what the challenge is, the emotion of the fact that, I never looked at our radio show as our radio show. I looked at our radio show as everyone's radio show. And the thing that I most enjoyed about it, I never felt like I had some opinion that had to be out there. I never felt like I had some viewpoint that was unique enough that everyone needed to be blessed by it. But what I really enjoyed about it was having the platform to help people that didn't have a voice for themselves in this city. And I appreciate that Derek, I think, understood and grew into that as well, where we really felt a significant contribution from other people and a responsibility to let other people contribute to what we were doing. So to know the local importance, even in a small sliver, to know that the local importance to some people of our show was not of importance to a national conglomerate, you always understand that. You know that that's a possibility and that you are nothing more than a serial number on a spreadsheet 1,000 miles away. I get that. But it is difficult that you don't get an opportunity to say, guys, but you don't understand what this means to some people. That part hurts a little bit, but you also understand it's part of the game. I mean, it's part of the business. It's part of what goes into all of it. And look, I really did hold my breath every day when I would swab that key fob and the little green light would come on.
We used to talk about that on the air. I remember. Yeah.
Today's not our day yet.
Yeah. You talk about the reaction. I think a testament to what you did on the air was the outpouring of support that came after the news that the show was ending. Too many to get into, but any interesting ones that you remember about all the people from different walks of life, from the highest level folks in sports and elsewhere who reached out to you? Anything you remember in particular about that?
I think the thing to me that was extremely gratifying and humbling was, when I logged on to Twitter one day and I'm looking at my mentions and there's an article tagged to me that there was a petition. And I promise you, that was not us that started that petition. But to see that Mario Andretti signed it and that, members of the pro sports teams in town had stood up for us, I knew the reality of what was going to come from it, which was not a lot, that it wasn't going to change the minds of a corporate cost cut. But to know that people did believe in us, and I think a little bit of it was just we represented to people. There were a lot of people probably that were behind us that had never listened to our show. Matter of fact, I would assume that anybody outside of the neighborhood I grew up in and my parents had never listened to our show. But that said, we represented the two local guys that were part of the national cost-cutting measure, and that resonates with people. That means something to people. But over the course of the year when that happened, and then, Gary, truth be told, when I had a heart attack, I had over 1,000 messages to me, which I'll never, ever, ever be able to quantify what that means. But the number of people that reached out to me that I'd never met, that told a story of a way that something that I did or our show did helped them or lifted them in a time when they were down, I'll never, ever, ever be able to illustrate. And I, for the most part, have made a career illustrating and putting into words things that needed to be painted into a picture. And that's one thing I'll never be able to illustrate, the emotions that come with that. And I'll never be able to repay those people. I tried to do the best I could to respond to every single one of them individually, but it meant a lot to me. And it will always mean a lot to me.
Well, you and Derek are back, right? You're on Wednesday nights with the Indiana Sport. What's the name of the network? Because I know it's
Indiana Sports Channel, which is part of Comcast. So basically, it's Comcast Channel 81. And then all of the, Derek's the young guy in the group, Gary. So he knows all the different social media platforms and, and internet platforms and podcast platforms, which you've done a great job, obviously, of cornering all of those things. So we do an hour a night. A lot of our sponsors who've been really good to us came on board and wanted to stand by us and back us up. So it lets us scratch that itch. You know what I mean? Yeah. Once a week we get together. It really is perfect because by the time minute 62 rolls around, I think, how in the world did I spend 3 hours a day with this guy 5 days a week? So I'm not here. Yeah. So it works well. We have fun with it.
What do you think? I mean, do you think ultimately you guys will be back on traditional radio at any point? Is that still a possibility?
I don't know. It's a great question. I know we'd love to do it. I would welcome the opportunity. Where that real estate comes is the challenge, because you really only have one sports talk show station in town here. They have a roster that is set with guys that are, people that are very capable and good people that do a great job for them. So there would be no reason for them to make room for Derek and myself. I had always said, Gary, when I worked the last job that I had, that was probably going to be it for me, because you kind of have to know when to walk away. You don't want to be that guy that's just been everywhere and people think, my goodness.
Yeah.
It's really a challenge because I don't know what my next move is. I've kind of waited for 6 months now. I've kept saying to myself, well, I'm going to have to get a job here. And here I am. I still don't have one. And I really did think that maybe from like a PR or a civic standpoint, that there would be something that might open, or someone would reach out to me. And, a lot of people say to me, they're like, well, I know you're a really busy guy. And I'm like, well, I'm really not. I like watching Price is Right. That's pretty cool. And then by like 2, I go and work out. And then that's really about it. I'm not doing much, which was nice. And for a while there, my own health trumped that.
Right.
So that was, it was necessary. But I'm definitely now in the point of wanting to get back in the game. Whether it's going to be in radio or not, I don't know. I know that people would have an interest in that, and I'm very appreciative of it, but I don't know if that's going to be a possibility.
Yep. Okay, Jake, each week on the Business and Beyond podcast, we have what we call a 2-minute drill, where I ask you a few quick questions, get your reaction, your response. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Most exciting race that you've called?
Most exciting race that I've called probably was the 2016, because it was the 100th running of the 500. And it was such a surreal finish with Rossi running out of fuel and winning the race, but also just all the build up to that and seeing the crowd and knowing that I was at the largest collection of humanity in one spot for a sporting event at any time in history of the world was unbelievable. So I would say it was that.
Best seat in the house at IMS. You've been in turn 2, you're in turn 3 now, but whether it's covering it or as a fan, where do you think the best seat at IMS is?
I'm going to give you what's going to sound like a cop-out answer, and it's not intended to. Whichever one you're sitting in.
Yeah.
Because every place I've been at that place, Gary, I've thought to myself, this is the best seat in the house.
Most underrated driver, either current or former?
That's a fabulous question. I think Juan Montoya is a generational talent. And I think Juan Montoya, as a 2-time Indianapolis 500 winner, has gotten certainly his due. In terms of that track, I don't know that people grasp that historically we're going to look back, not we, but people will look back 100 years from now at Montoya and say that guy was as good as his era. I think the same with Jacques Villeneuve. Jacques Villeneuve, the way that he took mastery to that track from the get-go to finish second and win in his first 2 races is unbelievable, which Castroneves you'd have to say as well, but Elio was with a great team.
Mentor, most important mentor outside of family. Is there one person who you really view as that most important mentor you've had?
Got to do this quick because it's the 2-minute drill, which is hard, but I will tell you this. Gary, Ed Sorensen well. You worked with them. Ed took me under his wing at an age when I was too young to probably be taken under a wing. And Ed was a polarizing personality to a lot of people, but he was nothing other than 100% generous in every aspect of his life, personally and professionally, to me, and opening up everything to me that I needed in order to get to where I tried to be. So he would be one, and the other would be Dr. Eugene White, who was the principal at North Central High School my senior year. Okay.
Song played at a Colts game that sticks in your head, and I know you.
There's only one.
I know you and Derek used to go on and on about that. Is there one?
I'll never understand this. I went and sat through so many games at the Hoosier Dome where 90% of the crowd's wearing Dan Marino jerseys because they're rolling out Art Schlichter and Mike Pagel and Gary Hogaboom.
Right.
And when the Colts would get a first down, they'd play Bang on the Drum All Day or BTO's Taking Care of Business. Those are the 2 songs they'd play. And then they get Peyton Manning and they're winning Super Bowls. And I thought, so why are they playing for me the same soundtrack of this horrid era? And I think they still play it. I mean, the Colts have done a lot of great things, and they've got a Taj Mahal building to play in. So why are they playing the DJ list from the USA skate rink at 465 in Shaylin from 1985?
Yeah. Okay. Final question. You visit obscure places, interesting, unique places wherever you go. Can you name the most obscure place you've ever visited in Indiana?
Oh boy. James Dean's high school bedroom. That sounds way more that sounds way more salty than it is. But I was in Fairmount and I knocked on the door 30 years ago of his childhood home, and they said, "Yeah, sure, come on in." And his cousin took me up and showed me where he lived and everything. That's only obscure. It's not obscure, but I don't know how many people have
different. It's definitely different, Jake. Yeah. And you passed the 2-minute drill, which is never runs 2 minutes. So you passed with flying colors, Jake. When we return, how Jake got a start in broadcasting. That's an interesting story or stories. It began with a phone call as a 12-year-old, and talking about some very interesting situations, including facing a real life and death situation last year. That's when the Business and Beyond podcast returns. Stay with us.
The Healthiest Employers Award program is now open to companies of all sizes in the state of Indiana. We have created a community of wellness leaders from across the country dedicated to cultivating a more proactive approach to employee health and well-being. To nominate your organization, visit us online at healthiestemployers.com. Healthiest Employers, the nation's leading corporate well-being award.
Welcome back to the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. My guest this week, sports media personality Jake Query. And Jake, great to be with you. You know, you touched on this in the first half of the interview, but your path into the broadcasting industry, like so many people, very interesting. You had this passion to do this as a very young guy at 12 years old, and you started calling the Channel 6 newsroom, the sports department, right? And got one Ed Sorensen on the phone.
That's correct. So I would watch Channel 6 News every night when I was a kid. I mean, even like in elementary school.
Yep. Howard
Caldwell and Clyde. And my parents let me stay up till 11:30 or whatever it was every night. And so at any rate, I knew that my mom wanted me to be a doctor and took me down to the IU Med Center when I was in second or third grade. She had a friend that worked in the blood lab, and I walked in and they were separating the plasma. And I saw the blood. And I about fainted. And we walked out, and my mom says, I looked up at her and said, I'm going to be a sportscaster. And that was that.
That was it.
So, and then report cards started rolling in. So I basically secured the fact that there was no way I was going to med school. So at any rate, when I was in the 6th grade, I called Ed Sorensen on the phone one day, and he answered. And for those that don't know, Ed was a very popular, well-known, and sure of himself sportscaster.
Oh, yeah. Right.
And Ed answered and said, sports. And I said, hey, my name is Jake Query, and I'm a 12-year-old, and I go to Eastwood Middle School, and I want to be a sportscaster. And Ed said, buddy, everybody wants to be a sportscaster, and hung up. So I called right back, and he answered again. And I said, I have a question for you. And he said, okay. And I said, if you went to a restaurant and the waiter was rude to you, and really mean and didn't say anything to you and just walked off, would you ever go back? And he kind of paused, and he was like, probably not. And I said, okay, well, I'm your customer because I watch you every single night. And I just called you on the phone and you were rude to me and you hung up. So why would I ever come back to watch you again? And he paused in his tracks and said, what was your name again? And I said, Jake Query. And I'll never forget. Ed said, is it Jay Query or Jake Wary? I said, no, it's a double consonant, Jake Query. And he literally said to me, Gary, well, Jake, can your parents bring you down to the TV station sometime? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, why don't you have them bring you down and ask for me? And I went down the next day. And I think he was thinking, who is this kid? So I showed up and I never left.
Yeah.
And literally, by the time I was a senior in high school, I had my own little Honeywell entry card into Channel 6. And I would just go down on Saturday nights, Friday nights, after the football games or whatever, and just observe. And I would just sit in there. And then eventually that came to tearing scripts and doing whatever, and really just being a kind of a confidant to Ed and vice versa. And he literally, when I say professionally, personally, every aspect of it, took me under his wing, and I had basically carte blanche to anything that he had to do. I was there with him, and we were off and running.
You were getting on the job training in a most unique way and in a great way. I'm sure you just learned so much over the course of those years, tagging along with Ed and kind of soaking up the sports business.
It was invaluable. And, when I finally left, I finally got a job once I got out of school, and, I went all the way through. I never had an official internship at Channel 6, but, Ed pulled a lot of strings and went to bat for me several times to get me on as an hourly temp employee through temp agencies, anything he could to justify me loitering, basically. And then finally, when I got to the age of getting out there, I remember one time Ed said to me, he said, "Well, why are you still here? Like you dream of going out and doing this. Why are you still sitting here?" And he said, "I think you're afraid of failing." He was right. So he said, "Here's what we're going to do." I was like 25 or 26 at the time. And we went to the 21st Amendment on Meridian Street. He said, "Go in there and buy 2 cases of Strohs." So I bought 2 cases of Strohs, and I thought, where is this going? And we went back to the tape room, Gary, where you spent some time at Channel 6.
Yep.
And we walked in, and Paul Castagnoli, who was still is, great dude. Paul Castagnoli's back there doing tapes and dubbing stuff. And he said, "Hey, Paulie, Jake's got 2 cases of Strohs for you." And I thought, what? So I looked at him, and I gave Paulie my 2 cases of Strohs. And Ed said, "Then we're going to go in the other room, and Jake's going to record my sportscast, Paulie, and you're going to record it. Then you're going to dub it off to about 200 VHS tapes for him to send to every TV station in the country." And Castagnoli said, "Sounds good to me." And I went in and did it. And I sent him out to every TV station in the country. And every day I'd come home and look at that answering machine, no messages. Finally, one day I came home and there were 2 messages. One was from a TV station in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and the other was from Fox Sports in Los Angeles, who I think really, in reality, just was in desperate need of filling spots. And they had an opening in St. Louis, and I moved to St. Louis a month later. And when I left, I said to Ed, "Look, man, 15 years of preparing for this moment, I could never repay." And he stopped me right there. And he said, "Jake, all you need to know is this. If I ever find out that some young guy needed some help or wanted to shadow you, and you told them no, I'll haunt you for the rest of my life." I said, "Okay."
Wow. I love it.
That was that.
Great story. And I could see Ed saying that as well. So you made a transition, though. You got the TV gig, you're doing TV. What made you go to radio? Because you took a job at WIBC, right? And I remember you were elevated. You were the morning co-host, right? In the morning show for a while.
Yeah. So when I was at Channel 6, Dave First was there, who's one of my best friends. Dave and I were like brothers. I was in his wedding, and I knew that Dave wasn't going anywhere. I mean, there was clearly a glass ceiling there, but then Channel 6 also was undergoing some changes in terms of their direction and leadership, as you well know, Gary. And so I was let go from Channel 6, and I was let go and thought, man, like this place was my heart and soul. But very shortly after, within a week or so, Vince Welch, who had been at WIBC, called me, and Vince was leaving WIBC on his own terms because he was having an elevated profile within auto racing television stuff. So Vince called me and said, "Man, I think you'd be a great candidate to do the morning show with Jeff Pigeon and Terry Stacey as the sports guy to replace Vince." So I went and interviewed, and they hired me. So I was not on the beach, the phrase that we used, for very long. Fortunately, I was very lucky. So I went and I loved it. I did the morning show. I loved Jeff Pigeon. He was an incredible talent, a great guy, still is a great guy. And so I enjoyed it. And then after about 10 months, they came in to tell me that Pidge was retiring and they were going to elevate me to become the main show, morning show host. And I told them at that moment, I said, "Guys, I'd much rather do an afternoon sports talk show. If you are doing, at that time, they were flipping 1070 into 1070 The Fan, which it is now. And I said, I would much rather do that." And they said, "Oh, no, Jake, you're more than a sports guy. You're more than a sports guy." And I remember, Gary, thinking to myself, look, I have no idea I'm flattered they think this of my talent, but if they think I'm going to get 28-year-olds to get up at 6:30 in the morning to listen to mortgage rate interviews and political discussion of the Indiana House,
Right.
They got a long time coming, right? And so I kept telling them, like, listen, I'm flattered by the situation here, but I'm not. I mean, I'd much rather just be doing sports. And then after 2 years of that, they called me in one day and said, "Jake, you're really kind of just a sports guy." I said, "Yeah, no, I told you that like 2 years ago." But by then I had transitioned also to picking up the job with the IMS radio network. So I did that for a year or two, just racing stuff before iHeart called me. And then I was hooked up with Derek.
Yeah.
And then 9 years later, now I'm doing a podcast with you.
Yeah. What getting hooked up with Derek, because you had not met him right before you started the show?
That's really pretty correct. I only knew Derek because I had seen him in the media center doing his show when he was doing a solo show on a different radio station. And I really was pretty impressed by him. I'm like, man, this kid sounds like really good. He's pretty sure of himself. I liked his delivery. And then I found out that he was a huge Knicks fan. And at that time, my girlfriend's father, the girlfriend that I still have, Shannon, her father was working for the Knicks. And so I had went to Derek and I said, hey, like, I think we have one thing in common. And this is the weirdest thing ever, but like, I kind of like the Knicks. He's like, you like the Knicks? And I said, well, I was a Pacer fan my whole life growing up, but I watch them every game now because my girlfriend's father's working for the Knicks. And so we kind of had that line of communication, but that was really about it. And then when they asked me if I would be interested in doing an afternoon show, I said, well, I still want to be able to travel for IndyCar. So you would need to find somebody that can fill in when I'm gone,
right?
Those kinds of things. Meanwhile, they're telling Derek, hey, we're going to hire you to do this show. We might have Jay Query help out a little bit. They tell me we're hiring you. We might have Derek Schultz help out a little bit. And then they hire both of us and they say, okay, well, you two figure it out. You're co-hosts. And that was that. And the first day on the air, we're both looking at each other like, well, who goes first? And of course I was thinking I go first.
Right.
And
you thought it was your show, right?
Correct. And, you know, I will forever owe Derek a huge, huge debt because I learned so much about what happens when you give people a shot because he is far more talented than I. He plays his role perfectly. He does his job really well. And he made my life so much easier to the point where we could just telepathically do it. It worked well. It worked really well. But I am far more reliant on I than he is of me. There's no question about it. I mean, I'm far more reliant of him, than he is of me. There's no question about it.
Yeah. You know, I want to mention, Jake, the past year, mentioned your heart attack, a real life and death situation. You look great now, very healthy, I assume, but that was a real scare for you back in October of last year. You really faced, again, life or death situation.
I did. It was October 22nd. You never forget that date when it happens to you, I can promise you. But I had just sat down for dinner and I had a friend, Mac Engel, in from out of town, and myself and Shane and my girlfriend were meeting Mac for dinner along with another couple. And as soon as we sat down, all of a sudden the left side of my arm just went numb. And I don't mean gradually. I mean instantly, like someone put a tourniquet on my arm is how I describe it. But at any rate, I knew then something was up. And it didn't take long, 10 or 15 seconds into it, I thought I'm having a heart attack. And my dad had one when he was 49, I'm 48. So I've always known it was possible. So I looked at my friend and said, we got to go and we got to go now. And I didn't want Shannon coming because I didn't want her to worry. And, you know, I kind of wanted to downplay the severity, even though I knew the severity. So my friend drove me to the hospital and I walked in and said, I'm having a heart attack. And they put the EKGs on me and the wires, and I'll never forget the look on the nurse's face when she looked beyond me at the monitor. And she said, I will tell you that there is significant concern. And then Dr. Benjamin Mottman came in, the cardiovascular interventionist at Community Hospital up on the north side, Community Health Network. And he was very matter of fact. And he said, here's the deal. You're having a 100% blockage of your LDA. 2 of the panels of your heart have stopped working. And we're going to do the best we can to get you in, you know, and I knew what an angioplasty was and those things for my dad. And I remember he said, we have paged the cath lab to be on their way in. And I stopped him and I said, now, when you say page, do you mean like they're at the Red Robin on Shadeland or like they're at a soccer tournament in Bloomington? Because there's a distinct difference here. And he said, no. The clock has started. They have 20 minutes to get here. We're at minute 4. So we have 16 minutes at the most. And I said, okay. And then I said to him, I said, so Doc, you can be honest with me. Like, I'm going to die, right? I mean, that's the reality. I'm going to die. And he said, well, I will tell you that you're in the best place you can be if that process begins. And I said, that doesn't answer my question at all. Which pretty much answers my question.
Oh, wow.
But in that moment, Gary, I did really think that that was it. I didn't think I was going to make it out of that room. I was able to call Shannon on the phone, and I'm forever grateful for that. And then as I was waiting, not knowing if I was going to make it out of that room, you mentioned earlier in this podcast that I go to unique places.
Yep.
And a lot of those, strangely enough, are cemeteries. I know it's weird, but like historical people, I go to the resting. I actually saw my headstone, and I looked like I was in this deep thought, and I saw my headstone. And I remember thinking to myself, I would have liked more than 48 years. But in terms of the way that I approach my life, the people that have come in and out of it, my transparency to those people about how I feel about them, I can't complain, because all that I need on that tombstone, I guess, is the years that I'm looking at, because there's nothing that I need to have inscribed on it that I left unsaid or left undone to anybody.
Yeah.
And I felt a tremendous peace. And I just, in that moment, I thought it would be disappointing if this is it, but I've led a life that I've been so incredibly lucky that I can't complain.
How has that experience changed you? I mean, are you more reflective now? I mean, you just kind of answered that question with what you just said there, but you find yourself being more reflective or attacking life in a different way because of your experience?
And I hope this does not come off as arrogant. I really hope it doesn't. But when I left and was checking out of the hospital, I remember Dr. Mottman said to me, Jake, this is the point in the movie where I'm usually telling people that their script has completely changed. And he said, in your case, your script saved your life, your lifestyle. And I don't mean that I'm better than anybody. I'm not. But I'm fortunate in the fact that I'm really a picky eater. And so I really only like to eat like 5 things, and they happen to be healthy. I was never a smoker. I am just vain enough that I was worried about losing weight, started doing a lot of cardiovascular exercise about 10 years ago. And it really had nothing in any way, shape, or form other than me wanting to look good.
Yeah.
But, so from that standpoint, but then I also thought to myself, Gary, I'm like, the way it changed me is in the fact that, to me, the peace that I felt in that moment and the ability I had to accept the reality of the moment just solidified to me that I needed to keep living my life in the same way. And so when that situation comes again, I now know what goes through your mind. And I guess I feel like so long as I'm living my life the same way that I was just before October 22nd, that I'll have that same peace, and I can live with that.
Yeah. Well, to kind of put a bow on this story, you were a big mini marathon guy, right? Ran the mini for a number of years, and you made a deal with your doctor, right? That you two together, right, would run a half marathon, and you actually did that on the Monon not long ago.
Yeah, I wouldn't know if I would say I made a deal with him as much as I basically guilted him. But there were 2 things I said to him before I even went into the procedure. The first was I had asked him where he was from, and he said Detroit, and he said he was a Lions fan. And I said, well, you should take a picture of me right now. And he said, what? And I said, you should take a picture of me right now. I mean, I'm gray. I'm sweating profuse. I got wires all over me. And he said, why would I take your picture? And I said, so the rest of your life, when people ask you what it's like to be a fan of the Detroit Lions, you can show the picture of me right now and say that pretty much encapsulates what it looks like to be a Lions fan. And he was like, are you serious, man? Like, this is, and I said, look, I know it's serious, but what are we going to do? Right? Here we are. So then I asked him right off the heels of that. So that led to a conversation about sports. And this was all just during the 5 minutes or so that we were waiting for the lab to be ready to go in for the procedure. And I asked him if I would be able to run the mini marathon in 6 months. I said, give me a gauge as to how bad my heart is if I make it out of this room. And I was realistic, but I said, if I make it out of this room, will I be physically able to run the mini marathon in 6 months? And he said, there are a lot of questions that need to be answered to that point, and there are a lot of steps that you'll have to take. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, I will do everything you tell me to do, and I will follow every step. But when I do that mini marathon, if I make it out of this room, then I want you to run it with me. And he looked at me and said, man, I don't know if I could do 13 miles. I mean, that's in 6 months. And I said, well, look at me. Like, look at me right now. What's your excuse? And he kind of laughed. And then about 3 months later, I got a text from him, and it just said, I'm in. And we didn't really talk about it until a week before we did it. And I texted him and said, you know what? April 22nd will be exactly 6 months to the day we met. And we met because I had a heart attack and you opened my heart up and you kept me alive.
Yep. Well, that is a great way to kind of put a bow on your story, Jake. And it's been a real treat to catch up with you. Very proud of your success. I remember the days as I was a reporter at Channel 6 when you were there for a number of years. So something we didn't get into, but you've been so giving of your time and raising money and helping people less fortunate, those on hard times. You've done that in a big way as well. So, Jake, all the best to you in whatever's next. Be listening, obviously, on the IMS network. Good luck to you in everything you do.
Gary, I appreciate it very much. It means a tremendous amount to me to be asked to do this. You know, your mark within this community, to even have you know my name is very surreal to me and very flattering. And at the same time, anybody listening, if you got a job for me, let me know.
Got it. Jake Query, a real difference maker in our community and beyond. Jake, thanks again. And thank you for joining us on this edition of the Business and Beyond podcast. It's presented by PNC, a weekly conversation with leaders in business, sports, entertainment, and beyond. And you can listen to all of our episodes and get business news 24/7. Just go to InsideIndianaBusiness.com. I'm Gary Dick. We'll see you next time.